welcome to the SaaS Revolution Show. I'm your host, Alex Theuma, CEO and founder of SaaStock. Delighted to be joined today by Ryan Staley, who's the CEO and founder of Whale Boss. Welcome, Ryan. How you doing?
What's up, Alex? Happy to be on the show, man.
Yeah, good to have you on the show. I'm embarrassed to kind of like admit, or maybe I shouldn't be, but like I recognize the people behind you in the picture, but I can't name them. Who are they and why are they there?
It is one of the best purchases I've made in the history of my life, or maybe post-COVID era. It's basically Chris Farley and David Spade, and Chris Farley's lighting a car on fire from the scene of Tommy Boy. So I originally bought the picture in 2020 in the middle of COVID when everything was shut down, and I put it up. I saw it online. I'm like, you know what? This just makes me smile, so I'm going to buy it, put it up, and then I'm like, it's not professional. I can't have it in the background, right? So then I put it in the background, and it is probably the most talked about piece of anything that I've ever had, and people love it. So it's made a lot of people smile.
There we go. It's a conversation starter, sort of icebreaker, and without knowing that, I led into it as well. And unlike me, I've got the kind of formulate business books on a shelf leaning to one angle and a plant that's barely kind of holding them up. But I aspire, and this is going to happen, like, and you can hold me accountable to this, but within the next 6 to 12 months of having my own kind of like professional podcast studio rather than like, where I am at the moment, kind of recording this in my office at home. I think the dream would be, but it's quite difficult, I think, whether it's in SaaS and geographically, is, doing the podcast interviews face to face, right? Having people, kind of in person. But logistically, a little bit of a challenge. I mean, given like, where are you today, Ryan? Because I'm in Ramsgate, and where are you calling in from?
Like right outside of Chicago, straight west to Chicago. Yeah. So yeah,
it's just like our market and the online world and the SaaS space. People are all over the place. I've spoken to people today in Korea, or done podcasts today in Korea, in Austin, in Berlin, and now Chicago, right? And like to kind of get that all in a studio, in the UK, and whether it's in London, it's going to be much harder going. But occasionally it would be nice as well. But look, enough about my podcast aspirations and dreams and leveling up. Ryan, for those that don't know you, please tell them about yourself. Who's Ryan Staley?
Sure. I'll give like the 30-second to 1 minute version, because on my show, the Scale Up Show, it's hard when someone talks about themselves for 5 minutes straight. So I'll give the real quick version. So essentially, I've been in the revenue, I should say, category my entire life, ranging, and I've had every job, from the lowest job possible, which is the bottom of the food run, which is like the BDR, SDR job I started off with, which was inside sales when I did it, grew into complex sales, then into management. And then I got tasked to start an enterprise sales group where I grew that from 0 to 30 million in ARR in 5.5 years with 4 salespeople, no SDRs, no marketing. And from there, about 3 years ago, I left and I started my own company called Whale Boss, and really are helping companies apply the principles that I used in a capital efficient manner to scale, like that I've done throughout my entire career. So that's essentially why I started Whale Boss. And then to top it off too, I'm now releasing an AI product that I have so that I could put that in the hands of more people and basically give people an enterprise sales advisor, basically team and assistant that they could leverage. And so that's kind of what I'm working on next.
Cool. So like, outside of your, let's say, background in SaaS and the current business and the fact that you're a podcaster, and Chris Farley, did you say Farley? I was
Chris Farley. Chris Farley.
Farley, there we go. Oh, I should listen better. But my excuse is this is my 5th podcast of the day, and active listening it's a hard skill. But outside of that, like, what are you interested in outside of SaaS? What do you do? Like, tell me a little bit about yourself and life in Chicago.
Yeah, well, so my family's here, right? So I have family close by. And I grew up here and I love it. I mean, I don't live in the city anymore. I did for a period of time when I was young and single. And then, I'm fully domesticated now with 2 kids and a dog and a wife. So I got that whole thing buttoned up. But I guess like what I like, and there's a couple areas of this, man. Like I've been absolutely infatuated with with AI since the founder on my podcast introduced me to Dolly in November. So basically, once I used it and realized there was things that I didn't have the capability to do that I could do in seconds in a couple of keystrokes, that was like amazing to me. And so I've been devoting a lot of time over the last 9 months to that and understanding that with the large language models and other things. But then on top of that too, like in a more personal perspective, I coach my kids' teams for sports. So I'm a family man, like that perspective. Love to travel. I love sports, and I'm really big, as you can see, like kind of like you can't see it as much, but got a lot of books in the background. I love like personal development and growth and biohacking, so I'll nerd out on all that stuff too.
Favorite business book that you're reading at the moment?
I'm reading a couple. So one by Peter Diamandis. Have you heard of him at all before or no?
I know the name, but I can't place it right now. But yes, I know the name.
Yeah, it's called Exponential Organizations. And so basically they deconstructed what the difference was between companies that were highly successful at a unicorn status versus others. And it comes down to a lot of things ranging from an MTP, which is a massive transformative purpose, all the way to systems and how they approach it. And so that's something that I've been digging deep into right now.
Okay. Very cool. And then Whale Boss, like where did you get the name like Whale Boss from?
Yeah, so it was one of those things where it was just kind of like in this sales world, people are always talking about like, okay, well, we want to get more whales, right? We want to get more big customers. And that was one of the things that until I left my previous organization, I didn't know that going from 0 to 30 in 5.5 years with like no funding and marketing was anything special. I just thought it was just part of doing the job. And people are like, oh, you're really good at whales. And so that's at getting whales. And so, because I think one of our largest deals was $600K a month that we got with Amazon. Whole Foods is an unknown brand. And so really what we did is I'm just like, hey, this would be a cool name. And so that's kind of how I landed on it.
Makes sense now. I don't know why I should have seen that like coming in, but you are the Whale Boss. So it makes sense to call your company that. And the podcast, so you do the Scale Up podcast. Were you doing that like when you started the business? Were you doing that before? What is it about? Who should be listening to that? Yeah, tell us about that.
Well, the cool thing is I'm right up on about 300 episodes, just past that. So that's been exciting. And so I love podcasting, like I get to meet people like you and be on the show. And then in doing my own podcast, like I decided I'm like, okay, I really want to focus on providing value and interviewing SaaS CEOs, kind of like what you do, man. And so I think I've interviewed close to 150 of them over the last year alone. And so there's been awesome things that have been a byproduct of that, right? There's strategic byproducts of relationships that you create, while at the same time I've gotten customers from it. And then I've had a PhD in SaaS because I've deconstructed all those different folks' business models, how they operate, their challenges, their structure. So it's just been an awesome experience. And so that's what we focus on, is like how to scale up an organization. And once again, going back to my obsession with AI recently, I've been a heavy focus of like how to integrate AI into the business, how our company is leveraging it to scale up as well. And so I've been interviewing founders on that. I'm going to start doing my own personal pieces on it as well, because there's workflows where I'm discovering how we could do 8 hours of work in 20 minutes. And so I just want to share that with as many people as possible, because I think it's going to be one of the biggest single changes in mankind that we've ever experienced. And it's going to be hard for a lot of people. So I just want to share some of the things I'm finding, because it's been like mind blowing. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I concur. I mean, I've been doing podcasting now for 8 years. A great way to meet people that you would never like normally meet, because I mean, actually we did meet in, I think Nathan Lacker's conference, but it's typically, meeting someone that's based in like Chicago, like when is the opportunity for that to happen, and people that have similar interests or people that you want to learn from. And so it's a great strategic way to meet people, learn. I've learned so much from doing podcasting over 8 years, and a big part of the job that I love doing. Great to see, and a great way to build like personal brand, company brand,
Exactly.
etc. And I see the landscape of podcasting is pretty, I don't know, it's like saturated, sort of like I would say sort of right now. But certainly when you look back at, I think 2015 was when I started the SaaS Revolution Show, and there wasn't a lot of B2B podcasts, very few B2B SaaS podcasts. I mean, we may have even been one of the first, I would say. But now there's like a whole ton, which I think is great, right? But I see people kind of like thinking about whether we should do a podcast, and then they start and they just give up so early, right? Because it is a long game. You've got to be consistent. I think the podcast, I was just speaking to two guys, incredibly smart guys, founders of Evron, and their thing was like, or something that I certainly picked up was about consistency and being consistent in the things that you do, and people are just not consistent enough. And here, you've done 150 interviews this year, more than 300. Going kind of 8 years later, still going. But only, I guess, maybe still going because it's working, or maybe it's working because I'm still going. Like I don't know
how many episodes have you recorded, Alex?
I don't know off the top of my head, and that's embarrassing. But I think I want to say it's over 400.
Nice.
So actually, the fact that you've kind of like done 300 in the time that you've been doing it is really good going. I think like initially I was recording one a week, and then I think there were periods where like over Christmas or whatever, where I just kind of like stopped recording for a while, and wasn't pushing kind of much out, and then kind of like picking up the cadence again. But we've always published pretty much one a week, with the odd exception. I know like some people like publish like 2 a week or 1 a day. Like Laka does 1 a day.
Oh, yeah.
He's recording 9 on a Monday, and that would absolutely fry me. I mean, he's a shorter episodes, mine are a little bit longer, but I mean, today is very exceptional. I'm doing 5 today, and I'm sure I'll sleep well tonight. I think, but let's sort of move on a little bit about the topic that we chose sort of like before this, and I asked the question like, what should we talk about? What are the things? I think you gave us some options, and something that I think we both agreed that we see, and whenever the SaaStock founder membership that we have, which is this support network of founders, like a peer group, like helping each other get to 10 million revenue. We run a lot of like virtual events, masterminds, exclusively for them, and I'm often going to them because I want to get customer feedback and to say like, what topic should we talk about, in the virtual workshops, and always coming back, we need new customers, right? We need more pipeline, and it's like, we can't do pipeline and sales and new customers every time. And when we spoke, you kind of said, look, the single biggest challenge that you see is building pipeline within SaaS. So given that you've helped build a lot of pipeline and you're the whale boss, let's kind of talk about that and see why is it the biggest challenge is I guess kind of the first question.
Yeah, I think because, well, you mentioned, right, so that you thought podcasts were saturated, and there's been massive growth. I think you hit on a great stat. There's about 90% of them. I think you didn't mention this, but this came to mind when you were talking. I think 90% of them quit after 8 episodes, right? So even though it seems like it's saturated, it's not because of that, right? However, I think the biggest challenge with pipeline is like, it's very easy to get distracted from. That's one of them, especially for like the folks listening, the founders listening today, is it's easy to get distracted with everything else in the business, whether it be the back end of the sales process, the actual sales process, or the 10 million other things you're doing as a founder and CEO. So I think that's one of the things that reasons why it's a challenge. The other thing is too, is like, as you grow and scale up, once you break that 3 million barrier, then you break the 10 million, then you break the 30 million, I've seen it consistent. Like, it's very, very hard for companies to master it and just repeat that over and over and over again. And so like, that was one of the things that causes the most stress in a business too. So when I started looking at there's a couple different ways I think that you could solve that. And I know that you could solve it because I've seen it with folks that I've worked with. So if you're talking like in earlier stage or even larger stage, and this might be like an inception show because it's a podcast talking about podcasts, but I think one of the things that I've helped people with is a podcast as a pipeline. So set that up. And this basically happened on accident. Wasn't something that I was intentional about initially, but I started interviewing these SaaS CEOs, and a lot of them started asking me like, "Hey Ryan, so what exactly do you do? Right? Like, how do you do it, and what do you do? Like, really appreciate being on the show. Very grateful for talking to your audience. What do you do?" And so then that is basically like, tell me your elevator pitch, right? So then what happened was I would tell them what I do, and they're like, that sounds really interesting. I'd like to talk more about it, right? And so it was almost like pandemic golfing because it started off as, just a show, creating content and really providing value to my audience. But then what started to happen is I started to get direct conversions from the podcast. And so, one of the founders I work with, they're about 2.5 mil in annual revenue. And one of her biggest problems was pipeline. And so I helped her set this up, and there's a process that I refined by doing it. And so as a result, what happened was she got $500,000 in pipeline before she even launched her show, right? By following this. And then, shortly thereafter, she got another $1 million in pipeline, has got audience with, country leadership at like Walmart and 7-Eleven and other really big companies. And it's because it's based on human nature. It's like providing value at a massive scale upfront to people, right? For having them be on the podcast. They get to share their story, what they're good at, and promote themselves. And then in return, there's almost like a sense of, I don't want to say obligation, but reciprocity, where they want to truly help you if they can. And if you provide something of value, it's really easy to convert that on a consistent basis into revenue. Now, one of the things that always comes up is like, okay, well, how scalable is that, Ryan? And here's where I would say answers that question is, you don't need it to be scalable and fit every single part of your sales process. What you really want to look at this for is the top 20% of your ICP, which I call your perfect customer profile. If you do that, and let's say someone's average deal size, I looked at this for one of my customers, one of their average deal size was $18,000 ACV. However, if you look at the top 20% of their ACV, which is a perfect customer profile, or I should say the top 20% of their ICP, their average deal size was $45,000. So basically you look at that top 20% and those are the people you interview. So the biggest opportunities, or the whales, if you will. And that's when you create a flywheel of cloning, replicating, and growing your single biggest customers that you have year over year that leads to massive growth.
Makes a lot of sense. I think as you mentioned reciprocity, and I think if you look at Cialdini's book Persuasion, isn't it? Where he talks about this psychological, I don't know, kind of like pillars that you can sort of leverage when you're selling and marketing to people. And as you're calling out reciprocity there, it's definitely something that we see, experience through podcasts. Like, I don't know what the percentage is. It's not 100% of the time, but definitely most people, are good humans and appreciate the platform and the time, and would like to help in some way. From our perspective with SaaStock, I kind of do a little bit of a mix of that in terms of sharing a little bit of our strategy. Sometimes we just and maybe it's like a third, mm-hmm. But we will have guests on the podcast that, look, we've got no agenda, right? These are just good people that are going to add value to our audience. Then we have, obviously, we run, the SaaStock conferences. So then we will, have speakers that are speaking in SaaStock USA or SaaStock in Dublin on the conference, and have them, lead with value, have a normal podcast. And then at the end, just plug in the conference a little bit, right? Because I think it sort of makes a lot of sense. Hey, this amazing, founder, investor, whatever, is also speaking at SaaStock, right? So if you want to meet them in person. And so we do a bit of that. And then I would say the other third, and I'd be interested to see, actually, if we are quite, at a third, but for sake of this podcast is, hey, we're looking at who is our ICP, who are the top 20%, can we get them on the podcast, whether it is for them to become a potential sponsor, which would be great, or whether it's, hey, we get their CEO on so that they know about SaaStock and they get to meet me, we get to have a conversation, strike up the first, innings of a relationship, hopefully. And then following from that, we can, invite them to speak at SaaStock or, whatever. We find a way to say, like, hey, we have this other platform, which is events, and, let's do something together. So that's the kind of way we think about it. I know some people, I guess the question here, what are your thoughts, either like based on that strategy versus some people just going out and only interviewing prospective customers for all their guests? Is there a right or wrong in your opinion around that?
Here's what I would say is as long as you're like authentic and genuine and wanting to do two things. One is really have the person tell their story and share their journey, and it depends on what your podcast format is, of course, yeah. Right? But like as long as you have good intent with that, and then the other good intent that you need to leverage is to find a way to provide value to your audience. As long as you hit on those two levers, I think you could do any kind of format that you want, right? I mean, to be fully transparent, I do the same thing too, man. I don't do like 100% client acquisition. Like I said, it happened on accident. I like, if there's interesting people that I think would provide value to my audience, I'll do that, or strategic partners. So there's a lot of different ways you could do it. However, like, and then it creates a steady flywheel of content as well. You have those systems set up, which is like more the product-led growth angle versus the direct pipeline acquisition for high ACV. So there's multiple layers to it that you can leverage, but that's just kind of my view. You can play it multiple ways. There's no right or wrong way to do it. It just depends on what fits for your business and then your audience and then your guests.
What about some other examples of like how you help building pipeline, right? Obviously, there are all different sorts of SaaS companies serving different markets, and your SMB, your mid market, your enterprise. I think largely here you're helping a lot more expertise around nailing the bigger customers or acquiring the bigger customers. What else could people be doing? What are you seeing? How have you helped people do that?
Yeah, so another one that I love, another play, and this is for anybody who has, I don't know, you don't even need to have a ton of customers. You can have, I've seen it work with as small as 20 customers or 50 customers, right? Is referral LED growth. One of the things that organizations, and I've seen companies be hyper intentional about, is the product value that they deliver to their customers, which is, right, that's product market fit. That's designed around. At the same time, they'll be hyper intentional about a sales process that they create or a marketing process that they create. However, they're not hyper intentional about a referral process that they create. And so they'll treat it more like an event than a process, right? Like, oh, we just asked for referrals and we didn't get any, right? Well, that'd be like the same thing as you have a 7-step sales process, just going out and asking people to buy your product, right? It just doesn't work. Third of Tesla's Model S's were actually acquired through a referral program. And I think it was like 97% of Slack's users were as well. And so one of the things that I've seen work really, really well is to create a referral systems, I should say, within your business that's integrated in what your team's already doing. And the reason why is because they are literally the highest converting lead in terms of close percentage and in terms of they're above average in terms of speed. It leads to higher LTV and probably has the lowest CAC of any other opportunity that you could have for pipeline creation. And then at the same time, the beautiful thing is if you set it up the right way, is it creates a tighter emotional connection to your brand and your company that 99% of SaaS companies walk right by. And so what it does is it creates pipeline. This is the most beautiful thing, Alex. It creates pipeline that's not attached to hiring SDRs or is not attached to people, right? There's a people element to it, but to add pipeline year over year, you don't need to keep hiring SDRs or you don't need to keep putting money into paid ads. Like you could get this and it blows up a business. So that's one of the other things that I see working really well.
As you mentioned, SDRs, right? I think it's pretty common that we see a lot of SaaS companies. Obviously, you've got your inbound, you've got your outbound from the And the outbound, like, scaling up their business by just adding more SDRs, once they've kind of found the process that works. What are your thoughts kind of, around that? Like, how do you work with businesses that, like, I guess kind of do the SDR model? Is there a way or some like tips that you can kind of like, I don't know, just kind of like improve, or you see the things that are working like with SDRs sort of right now that people that are just starting to build out their SDR team, they could maybe get some learnings from?
Well, yeah. So I think here's the thing. Did you know that 73% of SDRs fail, basically?
I didn't know, but no, I didn't know.
Yeah. So the failure rate is like at 73%. The max tenure is like 18 months because nobody wants to keep doing it.
Yeah.
And the results, and I've seen this in like closed forums of CROs talking about it. I'm not going to say where I see this from, but I've seen it, and they're like, the conversion rates with SDRs in pipeline are so down. And in most cases, I've seen broader studies on it done across, I think it was like 300 SaaS organizations as well. And the reason being is because it's a broken model, right? There's still opportunity to leverage it. However, it's hard, and it's not designed for success anymore because there's so many spam filters, so many blockers, and you could be successful. However, it's really hard to nail because like people don't want to do it long term. You're basically asking kids that are right out of school with their first job to get the shit kicked out of them for every day. And at the same time, you're basically expecting them to have the business acumen to be able to convert people that are 20 years senior to them in terms of business experience into converting and want to meet with them. And like I said, there's elements where it does work, but it's not the catch-all solution that I think is what's kind of caught on. I think the SaaS industry is brainwashed and thinking that's the only way to go. And so that's why I started helping companies with the referral LED growth model, because like you have so much goodwill. Like for example, here's the criteria. If you have decent retention, right? Let's say you have good client retention. At the same time, you have a chunk of customers that you could leverage, anywhere from 20 at the minimum, but 50, 100 plus, right? What'll happen is like not having a referral program for pipeline is the equivalent of not having an upsell and expansion motion for clients. Like in my mind, that's how ridiculous it is, because like you're literally fishing with dynamite once you do it. So instead of like piling more SDRs on or trying to make them more efficient, I would say is like leverage the top SDRs that you have, but then also look at other models, like really focusing on the customer emotional experience, systemizing referrals, and then that'll create the pipeline you need.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to move into the quick-ish fire round now, Ryan. What one thing has moved the needle the most for you in your career?
I would say, it's a great question, man. So I would say the number one thing is, especially with large deals or sales as a whole, there's a large failure rate. I think 67% of sales reps do not make their quota. CROs have like an 18-month average tenure rate. So with that, sales is one of the most highest rewarding jobs, but also one of the highest risk. And so I would say grit is one of the things that helped me succeed, because like there's so many times where I've been told no, or that it's not going to happen, or just non-responsive. And the basically the perseverance and resiliency is what's led me to overcome things like that.
What's the biggest failure you've made and lesson learned?
Yeah, so I think the biggest failure that I made was in leadership. And part of the reason, and this actually became one of my largest successes, is the reason why I got tasked to start up an enterprise team, because the team that I had working for me didn't like me anymore, right? And I sucked as a leader because of the fact I thought the best way to succeed was to work as many hours as possible, grind myself into the ground, abandon everything else, and focus only on business. That made me miserable, which in turn made me not fun to be around, which made me, even though we got results, made me not a good leader, right? And so that was one of the biggest failures I had. but then that led to a new opportunity, which was absolutely amazing for my career, my life, and my family.
What do you think is, I'm sure there's many things here, but what's one of the hardest things about sales in 2023?
Yeah, I think one of the hardest things is like you have to be exceptionally well. And because of the B2C buying experience that folks have, they expect that on the B2B side, right? With the customization, the relevancy, and then the third layer is connection. And all the way down to like how you communicate based on their disc profile, right? So there didn't used to be that level of expectation on the buyer side. There's a lot more patience, I think. And so I think that's one of the things that whether you're in sales or sales leadership, or you're a founder trying to do this, is really, really critical to get down to that level of detail, because that's what people expect at a bare minimum, combined with outcomes and results. If you don't execute on those two things, then that's where you get in trouble.
What's you mentioned a couple of books at the beginning of the podcast, but what's maybe one book every SaaS founder needs to read, whether sales or not?
Yes. So I think look at my bookshelf, because I got a ton. I got the one behind me, but I got a real big one over there, and I'm looking at them because there's a bunch that jump out at me. You know what it is, man? Like, I'm looking at that too. There's one that's called The Gap in the Gain. Have you heard of that at all?
Not heard of it at all, no.
It's by Ben Hardy and Dan Sullivan, and it's actually, so folks that are on my podcast, I give it to them as a gift. Founders that are on my podcast as a gift. And basically what it is it had a massive impact on me. I made my son read it. He liked it, but basically it's around transforming what happens to us in life and creating a positive experience from it. Because literally, if you are a founder, you have one of the hardest jobs in the world that will beat you up mentally at one time or another, no matter what happens. And so it helps you really experience the journey instead of just looking for the result. So that's one book I would recommend.
Good stuff. And a final quick one, because obviously we're both podcasters, and we talk about perhaps sort of using podcasts to build pipeline here. For those that don't have a podcast at the moment, what's like a good tip to like either get going or be successful in some way in podcasting?
Yeah, I would say just start simple and small, right? Like the easiest way to get started, most people are like, well, I don't know who I'm going to interview. I don't know how I'm going to get people. Like you could literally just start with like Zoom, right? You don't even need to pay for it, right? You could start with Zoom, interview 5 of your clients as a base, as a sample, and then start there. And you don't even have to publish it on podcasting platforms. If that's a barrier, you could publish it on social, and then just start small like that. See if you like the experience, see how it goes. But most people that do it love it, kind of like we do. And so that's what I would say is that'll stop from it being like this big, hairy, complicated thing, and you can just get moving.
Yeah. I mean, I've met and spoken to, I'm sure you have as well, so many people that said like, hey, I'm going to start a podcast, and they just never get going, right?
So true.
I think they're a little bit daunted by it, and they just kind of put off, but just got to get going, start small, and make the barriers kind of low and get going. But good advice. And Ryan, we're at the end of the podcast. Where can people find you? Whale Boss Online, the podcast. Yeah, please do share.
Yeah, so I would say the Scale Up Show is my podcast. So if you want to check it out, would love to have you as part of my community. And then I publish content on LinkedIn daily, multiple times a day, right? So I'm sharing a lot of details and strategies. And so connect to me on LinkedIn and just put in the connection request that you heard me on the SaaS Revolution Show. And I have some really exciting things that are kind of coming down the pipe. My website's being redesigned right now as we speak. So those are the best 2 ways to get a hold of me and here's some of what I'm working on. Awesome.
Good stuff. Well, Ryan Staley, founder of Whale Boss and the Scale Up podcast. Thanks so much for being on the SaaS Revolution Show today. It's great chatting with you.
Yeah, it was a blast, Alex. Thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it.